precede the architectural act. So I think one very important part of the profession is exactly that. It is about evaluating the situation, building the right alliances, and then obviously building the right strategies before even proceeding with the architectural act. The architectural act in itself is completely irrelevant if it's taken on its own. So my first book that I published is called Local Heroes. It is the story of 18 characters, or my relationship with those 18 characters, who made some of my most important projects possible. And I call them local heroes because they were very local in their territory, had a very serious and important relationship with each one of the territories that they have opened to me. The first of these heroes is the entertainer, is the person who commissioned me the first project I ever built. The entertainer was a few years older than me, and I owe him everything I know about music. So we had known each other through parties, endless parties, and one day he decided to take his operation public, and we went on a very interesting venture together. And it's with him that I built BO18, which is the first project I ever built. Now, it's important to put BO18 in its context. We are in the late 1990s. Beirut is making its comeback. The nightlife, this is the kind of images that the Beirut nightlife produced at the time. See? Very glorious for some and very glorious for others. But it is in this context that I started practicing architecture. So I was not given any museums or any schools or any hospitals or any opera houses to build, but I started my career as an architect building nightclubs. That's not very glorious, it's not very prestigious, but this is what was given to me, because there were no institutional buildings being built in Beirut at the time. In my opinion, Beirut was not being rebuilt, as the country was not being rebuilt, as its institutions were not being rebuilt. So we were left with the private sector, and just the private sector, and I started, if anything, from the most vulgar end of the private sector, and that is the entertainment industry. So the guy you see here is me. That's not me. So I had long hair, and I spent a lot of my evenings in those circles because I was looking for work, but work was not coming. And it is in those circles that my first project came to me. So when that first project came to me, we were looking for a site. We met a broker. The broker who brought us the piece of land on which we built that plot. The broker had a very somber and interesting story, as he was involved at the beginning of the war. He was in charge of the security of an area called the Quarantine, which was near the port of Beirut. And then, in the later years of the war, was put aside. And by the time I came to him, he had become the broker of the church. The church in Lebanon being the biggest landowner. So this man was in charge of renting some of the church's properties to the private sector. When I came to him and asked him to find me a land in the Quarantine, he told me, I know the Quarantine like the palm of my hand. I cleaned it up in 1976. It turns out this man was in charge of cleaning up for certain people, massacre for others, but at the time there were stories we did not really want to talk about. The post-war years were very difficult, as to me at least, as very fundamental issues that had to deal with the right in our own history were not being raised. So I spent a lot of time with the broker, at least the first 2-3 weeks, looking for a plot of land, and of course the broker brought me back to his interpretation, at least, of the sad events that had happened in the quarantine back in January of 1976, when he was in charge, supposedly, of the security of the area, and using his terms, he cleaned it up. The broker brings me to the landowner, who also turned out to have also a very strange story hidden behind the surface. The landowner at the time had fled the country and was in Brazil, but it turns out the landowner was behind one of the biggest arms deal back in the late 80s, when the militias were dissolved, and was in charge of selling a big chunk of the ammunition and the arms of the Christian militias to the Balkans. And for some very complex reason, could not come back to Beirut at that point. So I had to deal with his brothers. This is the general mood that brought me to the site of B018 or BO18, where we built our nightclub. So we're building a nightclub on a site that has a very problematic history, a very problematic aura, as it was the site of a former Palestinian refugee camp from 1948 up until 1976, when it was cleaned up by the right-wing militia. And I'm literally in the middle of that, in the middle of that story, as the broker had taken part in that battle, and the landowner was also involved in a way or another in very complex events that had to do with our recent past. Yet, what I'm looking for is a site to build a nightclub. And that was very interesting because there are very few places in the world where you're looking for a site to build a nightclub. You just scratch a little bit of the surface and you hit with realities that are very difficult to tackle, particularly when you're building a club which is supposed to be a few-town destination, a place for debauchery and very easy and light pleasures. Yet building a club on that site at that particular moment in time turned out to be a far more complex story. And that's how we started. That's how I started my career. B018 is a building that is concealed. You drive by during the day, it is almost visible, as the peak of its roof is 70 centimeters above grade, which means you drive by this highway, which is one of the most important vehicular arteries of the city. It is the northbound exit and entrance of Beirut, and probably hundreds of thousands of people drive by this axis every day, and you would see that building as it is going to sleep during the day. It is sleeping during the day. The quarantine and its border was limited by where this handrail is. There was a wall up until 1976 before it was demolished. So, and what's very striking about this image is the very stark contrast between the extremely dense fabric on the other side of the highway, which was outside the refugee camp, and this void at the very end of the camp, which remains to this date. So we are in 1998, 22 years after the massacre has happened, and you still see something very wrong in this picture. There's an extremely dense fabric on the other side of the highway, which is inland. Then there's a void on our part of the highway, which is in fact the coastal part, was supposed to be developed earlier and more dense than the inland part. This means that there was a very visible scar, the level of the fabric of the city, the scar of the events that had happened 22 years earlier, was still very visible by the absence of building. And this is exactly why I did not build a rhetorical monument or something that was visible. I thought that by preserving the void, I would make the building, if anything, more visible. At night, when the sun comes down, the building wakes up, and opens up its roof to the sky. But as you zoom in closer, you will see that this is not really a building. This is completely wrong by construction standards, by the industry standards, as I had never built anything prior to building this project. I had never worked for an architect prior to building this project, but I had worked a lot with my hands since I was a young kid. So I built this thing with people who were not directly involved in the construction industry. The man who helped me build the roof was a truck builder, a coach builder. He built garbage trucks. And to him it was a piece of cake. But if I had presented this project to a contractor from the construction industry, they would have told me this is impossible to build. So if I have one lesson to give you, don't listen necessarily to contractors who are completely committed to the construction industry. Fight them, kill them, annihilate them. Yes. And try to build alliances with artisans who know their trades, people who work with their hands. Try to work with people who are close to you, close to your territory, who have the know-how that can adapt, that can be possible in your territory when you are intervening. Don't import stuff from China blindly. Don't commit and abide by the construction standards that are imposed to us by the Western world. Don't abide by the fascism of the green architecture and all these standards that are being imposed on us today as the BREEAM and all that bullshit that the Anglo-Saxon construction industry imposes on us. The closer you are to the people who are close to you, close to your territory, who know their trades, the carpenters, the welders, the better you'll do to your environment, both physical and cultural. So I built this thing, and it was supposed to last 5 years only, as the lease of the land was a 5 years rental contract, after which we were supposed to go. So I wasn't really worried about this building really surviving the test of time. I did not treat its steel carcass, which is 6 millimeters thick steel panels. Well, today the building is 21 years old. It has survived over 4 or 5 times its expected life, and yet the steel still survives. The roof opens and closes on a daily basis, and it never leaked a drop of water. In fact, we had water leaks in the waterproofing membrane, which was the most standard thing in the underground walls that we have borrowed from the construction industry, but we've never had a leak in the non-conventional techniques that we have adopted through our alliances with the artisans. So here it is when it wakes up. So it's at sleep during the day, wakes up at night, and it lets the sounds that are produced inside dissipate into its environment, because nobody lives in the quarantine. The place is still very desolate. In the quarantine, you have the garbage processing company, the tanneries, and the slaughterhouses. Everything that stinks is in the quarantine. In fact, I located my office in the quarantine a few years later after that, because nobody wants to be in the quarantine. So you can make a lot of noise in the quarantine at night, which is something you cannot make when you're closer to the center of the city. That's why I opened the roof and let the sound dissipate without any worry of provoking, or making without any worries of my neighborhoods. And the other phase of one of the panels here is also reflective, so that not only do we reflect sound to the outside, but we also reflect lights. So this is it, some 20 years later. The panels have rusted, but the place is still totally alive. And you see the roof opens up and closes, and we've been doing that thousands of times. The other face of the panel is made of plexiglass panels, very cheap, but very interesting in the reflections they give of the city. It's a very live kind of tableau, as cars that drive by in the background, especially at night, produce very interesting light effects, and it creates a very abstract reflection of the city, an interesting visual relationship between the city and the underground club. This is less of an architectural photo, but you can see what the place looks like at 6:30 in the morning or 7 in the morning. This guy's passed out. This lady doesn't know what she's doing. This one probably is going to regret what she's doing. So, that's the kind of places I've built. This is It was a fabulous adventure because I drew it during the night and built it during the day. It was a 6-month adventure. I must say I got spoiled, and I keep talking about this baby, which was my first baby. It's the first time, because I don't think many times in your career an architect has the chance to live such an intense experience whereby you design and build a project, and you're completely committed to that project and to no other project. It's almost like having an incredible relationship with someone and an exclusive relationship with someone. Today I feel like a whore because I have many projects. I have to handle 15 love stories or 10 love stories at the same time. I have to be in bed with 10 or 15 different projects. At the time, it wasn't the case. It was just one project, and not only was I in bed with this one project, but I did everything for that project. I drew its clothes, I fed it, I did everything. There was no contractor, I had no assistants in my office, I had no engineers working with me. It was me and just me. So I was designing, drawing at night, and then building during the day. And that was absolutely fantastic. It was almost like an experience you would have at school, except it was in the real world. I was building a full-scale model, one-to-one. Of a small building, it's true, but it was a full-scale model, one-to-one, making use of techniques that were completely outside the construction industry. And that was very crucial, very important for me, because I took that and into another level later on as I tackled other projects. UAT was conceived with a lot of rigor and precision down to its parking. You see, as the site was quite big, close to 5,500 square meters, I could put a very interesting circular ring that I called the carousel, so you could drive around in circles around the club and then park your car, give it to the valet, and if you had an expensive car, if you drove a Ferrari, it would be parked right here. If you had a shitty car, you could park it in the back. But I drew that building down to the last bolt with what was at the time very primitive computer modeling software. I think it was AutoCAD Release 11. So we had to mesh every time we subtracted or we added a solid to the model, and it would take hours for the computer to make those calculations. And I remember spending endless nights waiting for these calculations to come, and then plot these drawings with a plotter, not even a printer at the time. And sometimes the plotter running out of ink after 2 hours of plotting. And I thought that technology was absolutely fantastic, revolutionary, because prior to that, just a few years before that, we used to ink it by hand. So these are drawings of the time where I literally modeled every single bolt in 3 dimensions with these very rudimentary computer softwares. And then this is me, much later, 20 years later, just to give you a sense of scale, very proudly walking around my club, which has rusted away, but is still alive to this date. I was not necessarily aiming at becoming an architect, entertainer, or nightclub designer prior to arriving to Beirut. In fact, prior to arriving to Beirut, I still had the ambition of taking part in the greater reconstruction project, whereby we would evaluate our recent past and proceed with a very serious post-war re-evaluation or rebuilding of the nation. And this is one of my later projects in the US that I've worked on with Lebbeus Woods as a tutor, who at the time was very interested in the conflicts in the Balkans. And it's called Evolving Scars. This was a project about the possible recuperation of the war-scarred buildings in Beirut that were condemned to be demolished, particularly in the city center of Beirut, which was undergoing a new master plan or reconstruction master plan, which was a very symbolic project in the post-war years that was supposed to symbolize the reconstruction of the nation, the reunifying of the city that was divided between East and West Beirut. So I took a very generic ruin, and Evolving Scars was about turning the demolition of these buildings into an architectural act. And by doing so, I proposed what I called the memory collector. The memory collector was a kind of a pod that was very naively conceived to be open to the public, the general public, to feed their memories of that site, of that particular site in the early post-war years. And the idea was that the more you would feed memory into that pod, into the memory collector, the more the building would get demolished. So there was a literal connection between the amount of memory being fed or being collected and the amount of matter being demolished. And the idea was that with the disappearance of the physical ruin or the physical memory, we would be creating another memory which would be immaterial and the image of our times. And in the peripheral membrane, we would be collecting the ashes of the demolished building. Obviously, this membrane would have a point of saturation. That point of saturation would be reached when we would have completely demolished the ruin itself, the physical ruin itself, and when the black box of the memory of the memory collector would reach its point of saturation, at which point the whole structure would implode. Can we turn the lights off? The whole structure would implode, and the physical ruin would have disappeared, and it would have been replaced by the immaterial memory. Now I look back at this project, and of course it had the naivete. It was naive in the sense that it was an academic project. It was removed very far away from the political realities of the context. It was naive like a lot of academic projects can be naive. But what I find interesting is that at the time I was 22, 23 years old, and it was back in 1991, and I was already very much interested in this issue of dematerialization. Not the representation of the disappearance of matter, but literally producing architecture out of the literal disappearance of matter. And when I say that I was trying to turn the demolition of a building into an architectural act, I really meant it. And that, to me, was very important. And these issues kind of followed later on to the practical world, went to practical projects. Here it's with project number two, La Centrale, which is also a commission from the entertainment industry, but was located in a house or a room at the proximity of the demarcation line that used to be the battlefield between East and West Beirut. This house had been abandoned in 1975 and was given to me in 1999 to be restored and turned into a restaurant and a bar. And in the program of its conversion from what was a very humble house that housed many families, and turning it into a restaurant, there was a form of violence that I wish to express, because it was very interesting to see how, for instance, this building was considered historical, and what was considered historical by the Commission, or the so-called people who classified it as historical, was that you had to keep its facade up, you had to respect its footprint, but it didn't matter what you did inside it. And I found that to be very, very odd, or a very dangerous simplification of what history means. It's as if I took you, I drilled a hole in your skull, sucked out everything that was inside your body, and I kept your skin in tension with these temporary beams that you see here, which are meant to keep the facade up as you are gutting it out, as you're gutting the body out, and replacing it with another beast. And by the time you're done, the historical people will tell you, yes, now you have to replaster it and make it look like it once was, supposedly, although there's a completely different beast inside it. That I found to be extremely violent acts that I refuse to do. A falsification of history, a very dangerous simplification of history. So what we did is, we've resisted, we did not remove the temporary beams, and we have not replastered the facade. We have kept the facade decaying behind the second skin, which was frames of wire mesh, and I call this the poetry of decay. So we've let the building disintegrate behind the wire mesh, and everywhere we had intervened, we had done it in a very visible way. We had completely assumed our interventions all the way down to the window frames and every single component that was added to the structure. We've added on top of the building, as the roof had been disintegrated, a bar in a circular structure which also held the two load-bearing walls together. And this structure was circular because it describes the circular movement of the roof that opens and closes, which you will see in a second. Inside was a single big table with an H circuit in the middle, so that the waiters would be trapped inside the table. They would be prisoners of the table, and they would never share the space you're seated in. Their only way out was a staircase taking them down to the hall, which where the kitchen was located. If you look carefully at the section, you will see that the waiters will be walking on the plane that was 40 centimeters lower than the plane was seated at, so you'd always look down at them. It was an extremely violent space. It was my revenge to Beirut that was not giving me any proper public buildings, and it was my way of describing this marvelous denial of the post-war bourgeois society. And I was not being cynical here, as I was also proud of those, but I think even a restaurant could be there's a very critical space, and could, if anything, trigger some relevant questions, if anything, far more than a museum or the conventional institutional buildings. And you can see that the building had completely been gutted out, because now we have double, triple height space. And you can see the bar floating above. This is the bar, which has a retractable roof. Open, closes, open, closes. See that? Like the bins you put the bread in. And that was the assembly table. Although all it was just a restaurant, it was a very uncomfortable restaurant in the sense that people could not talk to each other, but they could only look at each other. What you see here are not microphones, but they're lamps that light up the plates that become light reflectors. At that point, I had become the architect of entertainment. My clubs were being published all over the world, and pretty soon all the entertainers and restaurateurs wanted me to design and build something for them because they knew they had a shot at international publications, which was not the point for me. So this is my third entertainment destination, and also a very problematic site, the demarcation line between East and West Beirut. The building next door was still squatted by refugees who were living without handrails, without running waters, without windows. My client rents this site, again, another temporary building, and asks me to build literally a temple for a sushi cuisine, a sushi restaurant for the super rich. Yet the guys next door are living off less than $200 a month. So any serious architect who's politically correct would run away from such a commission. But I did not. So we really took this exercise, which was a very difficult architectural performance, and took it to its limits, in the sense that we decided to design a building that literally assumed the absurdity or the impossibility of its existence on this site at this very particular moment in time. And it really looked very foreign, but this was intentional. It looked so foreign that it became extremely site-specific, because it completely assumed its role. You can see next door, no handrails, no windows, with people living at $200 a month max, while we were serving sushi probably at $100 a pop. Inside the plant was also the position of a Swiss watch. In the middle was the elevator, or the circular room that started at ground level, which was the reception room. It's a circular room that once you're in, you felt completely overexposed to the street, to this very odd condition of contrast between the neighborhood and the sort of glorified arrival into the restaurant. And then you landed smack in the middle of the bar, downstairs. But once you were inside, you were in complete denial of what was happening literally behind the wall, next door. Here again, the absolute denial of the post-war bourgeois society is so much celebrated that it starts to become critical. BZ18, Centrale, and Yabani were three small-scale projects that I had complete control of their construction, complete control of the means of construction, but also down to the ashtray, the lamp fixtures. Everything was designed and built in situ. When you were in Yabani, your only contact with the outside was the sky and nothing but the sky, because you were in denial of what was literally behind the wall. We took these ideas after the third entertainment project. I thought, I had done what I had to do in that sector, and it was time to move on to something else. But the developers of more serious buildings, such as the residential sector, for instance, had completely banned me from the sector because they considered that I was a dangerous architect, an architect who could not be trusted to build buildings in which people would grow their kids in, because I was the architect of destinations, of debauchery destinations, or places where people would go and get drunk, and have sex, or things like that. But so I was fortunate enough, after many years of trying to get residential commissions, or more serious, or more, I would say, permanent buildings, or my first three buildings were temporary buildings. I meet a young entrepreneur who trusts me to build for him residential buildings. This one being obviously very much tied to my entertainment projects. This is a building, again, the agenda being given by the developer. I was telling you at the very beginning of my lecture, it is the alliances you build with those who make your projects possible that are very important. at the outset of a project. What precedes the architectural act makes the architectural act, makes it possible. So the entertainment comes, the young developer comes to me and tells me that he wants to build a building for bachelors, a building that would have no families in it, no kids, no school buses, none of that. And that the market did not offer that. So I found that to be a bit odd. And then we developed what seemed to be a very stupid scenario at the outset, or something not very realistic. But the idea is that you could drive your car into an elevator, drive it up into your apartments. Although the apartments were very small, the car would become part of the apartment. Of course, we also had parkings in the basements, but the idea is that this would be apartments for bachelors who could get out of nightclubs in good company, hopefully, and end up in their living room, and if they're very lucky, never leave the car, never make it to the bedroom. We ended up building it, and he ended up selling it extremely well, and he ended up selling it to non-families. There was no families at all, no kids, no school buses, so he was right. This is my bike in that magnificent elevator. This is me riding into one of the apartments, and this is a car in one of the apartments. Then we took on more rational battles, or more reasonable battles against the construction industry or the developers who were feeding the market with very bad typologies, residential housing typologies. This was our fight against these typologies, in the sense that we wanted to provide people with apartments that allowed you to go across your whole house without ever making it inside if you felt like it. Meaning you could wake up in the morning, take down the stairs, turn around the olive tree, go inside, make yourself a cup of coffee, pick up the newspaper and go down and see your kids without ever walking inside. This was in complete opposition with the very closed typologies, the very sealed apartments that the construction or the developers were providing. And we succeeded in it. And these did extremely well also, and sold on plan prior to construction, and the numbers were very good. And you can see in all of my projects that the intentions are extremely clear and very simple. There's no funny stuff. There is no aim at trying to invent forms or weird or odd shapes. Nothing at all. Nothing but the very simple split level section expressed on the facade, and that journey expressed on the facade, and nothing else but that. And again, this is me. I like to pose on my buildings, very proudly enjoying these terraces. Perhaps one of the most perilous exercises, this is more recent, we have completed, is this very big residential project of around 25,000 square meters of sellable area above ground, on a very impossible and difficult site. The story of this project is, and then again you'll see that everything is political in Lebanon. You just have to scratch a bit the surface and you hit the political issue. The developer comes to me, telling me that he's been offered a site that has almost 400 meters of periphery, perimeter, at a very affordable price, not very far from the center, yet surrounded by agricultural lands. But the price is extremely low, and he asks me to see if there's something wrong with it. And we study the site, and very quickly we get back to him in less than 24 hours, telling him, don't purchase that site, because this is a very dangerous site. This site has only 6.5 meters of intersection at its tip with the public domain. The rest of the perimeter, which is 390 something meters, is all private land, which means that, according to the law, in the very near future, any private plot around you could erect a building with a blind wall turning its back to you up to 50 meters. This means that close to 90